I stood outside the office door and heard my husband telling his secretary that I still did not know he had finalized the divorce papers. Watching the secretary smile smugly, I did not throw a jealous fit, but quietly transferred my 59% controlling shares. The next day, the entire company witnessed a terrifying unmasking. I returned to Chicago a day earlier than scheduled. The business trip to Seattle concluded smoothly, exceeding expectations. I was supposed to stay another evening for dinner with our partners, but for some reason, I felt restless that afternoon. Perhaps because next week was my 10th wedding anniversary with Julian Barrett. 10 years is not a lifetime, but it is long enough for a woman to place her youth, trust, and flesh and blood into the hands of a man. My name is Eleanor Preston, 36 years old, chairwoman of the board of Preston Holdings. Outsiders looking in often said, I was lucky to have such a capable, elegant husband who knew how to run a company and always stood by his wife at major banquets. They did not know. 10 years ago, Preston Holdings was just a leased 400 feet room down a narrow alley in the West Loop. I sold the house my mother left me, gathered every penny of my savings, and took out a bank loan to build this company from nothing. Meanwhile, Julian was just an unemployed sales manager, holding me in a sweltering apartment and saying, Eleanor, I will never betray you in this life. Trust me this once and I will give you a lifetime of peace. I believed him so much that when the company grew, I gave him the position of CEO so he could hold his head high around both our families. Believed him so much that I transferred a portion of my shares to him, just because he once sadly mentioned that everyone at the company called me the founder. While he seemed like a man riding his wife's coattails, believed him so much that for years I shouldered the hardest meetings, the heaviest loans, and the most painful client rejections, just so he could appear at signing ceremonies with a flawless smile and an expensive suit. That afternoon, I pulled my small suitcase out of O'Hare International Airport. In my bag was a box of pecan pralines. He once said he loved the most when we visited Charleston in our first year of marriage. I did not tell him in advance. I wanted to see the surprise in his eyes, wanted to hear him lovingly complain about why I did not tell him to come pick me up. I thought I would open the CEO's office door, place the box on the desk, hug him from behind, and tell him the contract was signed. This year, the company could relieve a massive financial burden. I thought we could still grow old together. Even though in recent years he had been busier, colder, our shared meals less frequent and our phone calls shorter. But some doors were not meant to open to joy. Some doors only need to be cracked open a tiny bit to collapse a lifetime of trust. I arrived at the Preston Holdings headquarters near 7 in the evening. The office building overlooking the Chicago River was still illuminated. The glass panels reflected the city lighting up below. The receptionist gasped and stood up abruptly upon seeing me. Miss Preston, I thought you were returning tomorrow. I smiled and gestured for her to keep quiet. Do not announce me. I came back early. Is Julian still upstairs? Yes. Mr. Barrett and Chloe Jenkins are still in the CEO's office. Hearing the name Chloe Jenkins made me pause slightly. She was Julian's private secretary who joined the company 3 years ago. She was young, beautiful, tactful, always wore a perfectly fitted white silk blouse and spoke with a voice as soft as water. I did not like her, but I never made things difficult for her. I told myself that a female business owner should not be petty toward her husband's secretary. I told myself that trust was the bare minimum left in a marriage. I took the elevator to the 26th floor. The hallway had thick carpeting, so the sound of my heels practically vanished into the air. The closer I got to the CEO's office, the more I heard faint laughter echoing out. The door was not completely shut, just left slightly ajar. I raised my hand to knock, but that hand froze in midair. Through the narrow gap, I saw Julian standing next to his desk. The top 2 buttons of his dress shirt were undone, and his shirt was pulled askew. Chloe stood right in front of him, her head bowed low, her pale hands slowly adjusting his belt and trousers. That gesture was so natural, so intimate, so familiar, as if it had been repeated countless times. I stood dead in my tracks. In that moment, I could not hear the air conditioning, could not hear the city traffic below, nor could I hear my own heartbeat. I only saw Julian's lips curl up, his voice dropping low, lazy, and satisfied. Are you done yet, baby? If you are this slow, what if someone walks in? Chloe giggled, her voice coquettish. Are you still afraid of people seeing? CEO Barrett wasn't afraid a moment ago. I thought I had felt the ultimate pain already, but Julian's next sentence was truly a knife, plunged straight into my chest. He leaned close to her ear and whispered, but the hallway was so quiet then. Every word entered my ears as clearly as shattering glass. Don't worry. My wife doesn't even know I've already finalized the divorce papers. She still thinks she's the legitimate Mrs. Barrett. The pastry box in my hand nearly fell to the floor. Divorce papers. He and I had never been to court. I had never signed any divorce petition. Under state law, no one could secretly divorce a living, legally competent spouse without them ever appearing in court. So, what were his so-called divorce papers? A forged file, a fake decree to trick Chloe, or some conspiracy he had been preparing behind my back for a long time? The blood in my veins turned cold bit by bit. I wanted to push the door open and walk in. I wanted to slap the face of the man I once loved. I wanted to ask him why. Why did I sell my house to build a company with him? Why did I endure so many cruel words from his mother because I had not given them a child? Why did I ignore all the times he came home late smelling of strange perfume? And in the end, all I got back was a sentence saying his wife did not know yet. But when my hand touched the doorknob, I let go. No, I could not let myself become a hysterical woman screaming in front of a mistress. Even less could I let Julian know how much I had heard. A man who had the guts to pretend to love me for 10 years certainly did not just hide one woman in his office. Behind that elegant smile, there must be many dirtier things. I took a step back, my back hitting the cold wall at the end of the hallway. I hugged the pastry box, my nails digging so deep into the wrapping paper that it made a tiny rustling sound. I was afraid that if I relaxed even a little, all my strength would crash to the floor along with my last shred of self-respect. I turned and walked into the emergency stairwell. The heavy metal fire door clicked shut behind me, blocking out the laughter in the office. The space was dark and cold, the smell of old paint, dust and metal blended together, making me nauseous. I held on to the railing, trying to take slow breaths. Tears welled up, but I refused to let them fall. What was the point of crying? Would crying bring back 10 years? Would crying make that man feel ashamed? No. The person who deserved to be ruined was not me. I took out my phone and dialed my private corporate attorney. Nathaniel Reed was the man who had been with Preston Holdings, since the company did not even have a proper legal department. He understood the share structure, understood every agreement between Julian and me, and understood the things I had hidden because I thought spouses did not need to calculate things so clearly. The phone rang twice before Nathaniel picked up. Eleanor, you are back in Chicago already. I heard my own voice, so calm it sounded alien. Nathaniel, do me a favor tonight. Tell me, I want to transfer my entire 59% controlling stake in Preston Holdings into the protective trust we drafted as a contingency plan before. Make it completely legal and confidential. Do not let Julian Barrett know before the paperwork is finalized. The other end went silent for a few seconds. Are you sure? That is the controlling stake of the company. If we activate this mechanism, Julian will have absolutely no way to use his executive title to interfere with your portion anymore. I know something has happened. I closed my eyes. Before me flashed Chloe's hands on my husband's belt in that chillingly cold sentence. No need to ask. Just do it. Send someone to review all the corporate share records, the 3-year supplementary contract, our prenuptial agreements, and the company bank account signatory rights. By tomorrow morning, I want everything strictly in my hands. Lawyer Reed did not ask further. He simply said, "Understood, I will handle it immediately." I hung up the phone and leaned against the wall. The box of pecan pralines was in my hand, its edges crushed. I looked at it for a long time and then laughed. A dry, soft laugh that barely made a sound. My 10-year marriage turned out to be cheaper than a box of pastries brought back from a business trip. I walked down the fire-escaped stairs, each step echoing coldly in the dark void. I was no longer the eager wife coming home early to surprise her husband. I was no longer the Eleanor Preston who believed that as long as I was good enough, patient enough, and sacrificed enough, my marriage would be peaceful. Tonight, Julian Barrett could still hold Chloe Jenkins in the CEO's office I had paid for, and he could still whisper to her that his wife knew nothing. But he did not know that the woman he thought he could fool forever had stood outside that door and heard every single word. He especially did not know that the 59% stake he lusted after the most was silently slipping out of his grasp. I looked up through the small window in the stairwell. Outside, the city was still blazing with light, cars crowding the streets wet with neon reflections. Chicago never stopped for one person's pain, so I could not stop either. Tomorrow, I would return to the company, not to ask him why, but to let him know that betraying the woman who elevated him to the clouds was the stupidest mistake of his life. The next morning, I wore the black suit that Julian once said made me look excessively cold. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time, looking at the woman in the reflection. Her eyes were slightly red, but her face held not a single trace of weakness. I barely slept last night. Lawyer Reed sent me every scanned document, every transfer confirmation, every revocation of signatory rights. By 700 in the morning, my 59% stake had been placed in a protective mechanism that Julian could not touch. He still thought he was sitting on the throne in my company. He did not know the foundation beneath his feet had already started cracking. I arrived at Preston Holdings at exactly 9 litho. The receptionist hurriedly stood up when she saw me. "Miss Preston, you only have a board meeting scheduled today." I placed my handbag on the counter, my voice serene. "No. I am here to see CEO Barrett." Her face palled slightly. I knew the entire company thought I was still in Seattle, or perhaps some people were too used to seeing Chloe going in and out of Julian's office after hours. So when they saw me suddenly appear, they panicked more than the culprits themselves. I did not ask further and walked straight into the elevator. The steel doors reflected my face, cold and distant. In the past, every time I entered the company, I always thought I was coming home. But today, I was like an owner returning to clean up a house that had been soiled by trespassers. The door to the CEO's office was closed. I did not knock. I pushed it wide open. The scene before me did not shock me like last night, but it was still enough to make my stomach churn. Chloe was sitting on the armrest of Julian's chair, holding a cup of coffee right up to his mouth. Julian was leaning back, smiling very gently. The kind of smile I had not seen him give me in a long time. Hearing the door open, they both snapped their heads around. The coffee in Chloe's hand sloshed and spilled onto the carpet. Julian jumped up, his face deathly pale. "Eleanor." Julian let out a nervous sniffle. "Why are you back?" I looked at him, then at Chloe. She quickly slid off the armrest, tugging at her silk blouse, her lips trembling, but forming no words. I walked in and placed my handbag on his desk. The sound of the bag hitting the wood echoed dryly. "What is it? Do I need to give advance notice to return to my own company?" Julian forced a smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched uncontrollably. "No, that is not what I meant. I am just surprised. Was the flight exhausting? Why didn't you call so I could pick you up?" I pulled out the chair opposite him and sat down slowly, crossing my legs. From this angle, I could see the nameplate reading CEO Julian Barrett placed neatly on the desk. I had personally ordered that nameplate for him the year the company moved into this building. Back then, I thought his glory was also my glory. Now looking at it, I just found it comical. "Chloe," I said, making her jump, "brew me a cup of black coffee. No sugar, no cream." She looked at Julian for help. Julian immediately stepped out, trying to play the peacemaker. "Eleanor, you must be tired from traveling. Let me call another assistant to do it." I raised my eyes to look at him. "In this company, does no one listen to my orders anymore?" The whole room fell dead silent. Julian swallowed hard. He knew very well that the calmer I was, the more serious the situation. Finally, he turned to Chloe, his voice dropping. "Go make the coffee." Chloe lowered her head and walked out. But before the door closed, I saw that in her eyes, There was not only fear but also resentment. A secretary who has been pampered for too long truly starts to think she is the mistress of the house. Unfortunately, she chose the wrong house to step into. Please hit the like button to support my story. Wishing all listeners great health and peace. As soon as the door closed, Julian immediately circled the desk, intending to grab my hand. Eleanor, listen to me explain. What just happened isn't what you think. Chloe is just— I pulled my hand back before he could touch me. Just a secretary so dedicated that she sits next to your mouth to feed you coffee. His face stiffened. Don't speak so harshly. I am a man, and in the business world sometimes there is socializing. Socializing to the point of forging divorce papers behind your wife's back. The moment that sentence dropped, all the blood vanished from Julian's face. He stared at me, his eyes wide open as if someone were strangling him. In that moment, I knew I had guessed right. If he were truly innocent, he would be furious, but right now he was only terrified. Who told you such nonsense? I smiled. Does it matter who said it, or does it matter if it is true? He took a half step back, his hand unconsciously gripping the edge of the desk. No, there is no such thing, Eleanor. Surely someone wants to tear our marriage apart. Don't believe them. I stood up and walked to the large glass window behind him. Down below, the whole city was still moving in a rush. I had once stood here with him, on the day the company inaugurated this new headquarters. He hugged my shoulders and said, "Everything we have today is proof of our love." It turns out that the more beautiful the vows, the fouler the stench when they rot. I turned back to look at him. Tonight at 7, we are going to your mother's house. I want to hear her explain this divorce paper situation. Julian's expression changed drastically. There is no need, Eleanor. My mother is getting old, don't worry her. I picked up my handbag and walked past him. If you don't show up, I will have my lawyer send a formal notice directly to her house. He stood completely frozen behind me. I did not turn my head because I knew this game had only just begun, and the person about to tremble was not just him. I left the company without looking back. In the elevator, my phone buzzed constantly. Julian called 3 times and then sent a text. Eleanor, don't act rashly. I will explain tonight. This has nothing to do with my mother. Please don't blow things out of proportion. I looked at the words on the screen, feeling nothing but a chilling sense of amusement. The man who once promised to shield me from every storm was now only afraid I would drag his mother into the mud that they themselves had dug. I did not reply. I drove back to my private condo in Lincoln Park, changed into a different suit, and applied light makeup to cover the dark circles under my eyes. Tonight was not a family dinner. Tonight was the opening act of a trial that required no judge. At exactly 4:07, I stopped my car in front of the mansion in the affluent suburb of Wetka. That 3-story estate was a gift I bought for my mother-in-law in our 3rd year of marriage, right after Preston Holdings signed its first massive contract worth nearly $3 million. Back then, Margaret Barrett held my hand, crying until her eyes were red. Eleanor, I didn't give birth to you, but you are more filial to me than a biological daughter. I had believed those tears, believed them so much that the property deed was in her name. I only kept a trust agreement drafted by lawyer Reed for my protection. At the time, I even scolded Nathaniel for being too paranoid. Looking back now, without that paranoia, the Barrett family would have chewed me up to the bone by today. I had just turned off the engine when Julian's car sped up behind me. He got out in a hurry, his dress shirt not properly buttoned, his face pale with anxiety. Eleanor, listen to me first. My mother doesn't know much. Don't agitate her. I looked at him. Was he afraid of agitating her or afraid she would blurt out something he hadn't prepared her for? His lips were pressed tight. He reached out to pull me, but I took a step back. Don't touch me. Julian's face twitched. He always hated it when my voice got this cold because every time it did, he knew I had made up my mind and would not back down. I rang the doorbell. Seconds later, the door opened. My mother-in-law stood inside wearing a dark purple silk loungewear set, a pearl necklace I gifted her for her birthday last year, resting on her collarbone. Seeing me, she immediately broke into a bright smile, but her eyes darted quickly to Julian behind me. "Oh, Eleanor, you are back. Come in, dear. I heated up a pot roast for you." The business trip must have been exhausting. I walked into the house. The smell of rich gravy filled the living room. The dining table was set with all the dishes I used to love. In the past, I would have been touched, thinking she still remembered my tastes. But today, this thoughtfulness was merely a layer of makeup covering a face of deceit. I set my handbag on the sofa. "Margaret, you don't need to serve dinner. I didn't come here to eat tonight." The smile on Margaret's face faltered. What a strange thing to say. If you two are having issues, talk it out slowly. Don't come into the house with such a heavy face. Julian hastily interjected. "Mom, Eleanor is just tired. Let me talk to her." I turned to him. "You've said enough. Now it is your mother's turn." Margaret slammed a soup bowl onto the table. The sound of porcelain hitting glass rang out sharply. "Eleanor Preston, are you interrogating your mother-in-law? I know you are capable. I know you have money, but as a wife, you need to know your place. Julian spends all day at the company working hard. You travel constantly, leaving the house cold and empty, and you still haven't given this family a grandchild." He gets a little stressed. "If you won't sympathize, fine, but don't come back here throwing a tantrum." I stared at her for a long time. It turns out she had kept these words in her heart for ages, just waiting for the chance to throw them in my face. The fact that I lost my first child because I threw myself into saving a crucial contract for the company. The fact that doctors said it would be difficult for me to conceive again. The fact that I lay in the hospital for 3 days and Julian only visited once because he was busy meeting investors. In their eyes, all of it boiled down to one sentence. I had not given them a grandchild. I asked slowly, "Is that why you let your son forge divorce papers behind my back?" The air in the living room froze instantly. Margaret's eyes widened, the hand holding the serving spoon trembling slightly. Julian, standing behind me, began breathing much heavier. "Mom, about that," I cut him off. "Let your mother speak." Margaret looked at me, then at Julian. That single glance was enough for me to understand. She knew. Not only did she know, but she was the one pushing it from behind. A long moment later she sneered. "Fine, I know. So what? Since you've already heard about it, I'll be blunt. The Barrett family cannot end its bloodline. If you cannot give birth, you should know when to step down. Julian is still young. He needs a son to carry on the name. You cling to the chairwoman title, cling to the money, cling to the company, but you haven't given him a proper home." I felt a sharp pain in my heart, but outwardly, I remained completely calm. "Who bought this home?" she choked. "Who bought the Mercedes Julian is driving? Who pays for your vacations to Europe and the Caribbean every year? Who gifted you that jewelry set on your neck? Who built the company that allows your son to sit in the CEO's chair?" Margaret's face flushed crimson. "Don't you dare use money to crush people. A woman with all the money in the world who can't bear children is useless." Julian turned pale. "Mom, stop talking," I let out a very light laugh. "No, let her speak. The more she speaks, the less guilty I feel." I opened my bag, took out my phone, dialed Lawyer Reed, and put him on speaker. "Nathaniel, starting tonight, review all the assets I placed under Margaret Barrett's name. This Wetka mansion, the Mercedes S-Class, the 2 savings accounts in her name, funded directly from my personal accounts. Prepare the paperwork to reclaim them under the asset proxy agreement." Lawyer Reed's voice rang out clearly. "Yes, Eleanor, the files are already prepped. Once you confirm, we will serve the legal notices tomorrow morning." The bowl slipped from Margaret's hand and shattered on the floor. Julian looked at me as if looking at a stranger. "Eleanor, are you crazy? That is my mother." I looked him dead in the eye. "And I was your wife." The moment my words faded, the grand living room fell completely silent. Shards of porcelain lay at my mother-in-law's feet. Broth pulled on the polished marble floor, like a stain that could not easily be wiped away. Margaret stared at me, her lips trembling with rage. But for the first time in our 10 years as family, she could not immediately find a single word to scold me. Julian stood between us, his face ashen, his eyes a mix of panic and anger. "Eleanor, don't take this too far. Between husband and wife, I was wrong. I admit it. But going after my mother means you are personally cutting off any path back for us. I looked at him and instinctively laughed. A path back? You think after I heard you tell your secretary that your wife didn't know about the divorce, there was still a path back for us? My mother-in-law whipped her head toward Julian, her gaze sharp as a knife. You let her hear that for real? Just that one sentence confirmed everything. I did not need any more evidence from their mouths, but I still wanted to see how violently they would thrash before they sank. Julian ground his teeth. Mom, shut up. Margaret looked as if she had been slapped. You dare yell at your mother? Because of this woman? You yell at your mother? I slowly sat down on the sofa, pulling a thin file folder from my handbag and tossing it onto the table. The folder was black, containing only a few sheets of paper, but I knew its weight was enough to crush all of Julian's confidence. Before the two of you continue performing this mother-son tragedy, I want you to look at this. Julian stared at the file. His hand shook slightly, but he tried to maintain his composure. What trick is this now? Open it and see. He picked it up. When he saw the text on the first page, his expression changed instantly. It was the supplementary share agreement we signed in our 3rd year of marriage. When I transferred an additional 11% stake to him so he would look good in front of our partners. Back then, Lawyer Reed insisted on a protective clause. If the marriage broke down due to severe fault on his part, including infidelity, forgery, or illegal transfer of marital assets, the gifted shares would be automatically revoked. The further Julian read, the more sweat beaded on his forehead. Impossible. I don't remember signing this, I replied calmly. You don't remember because you were too ecstatic to receive more shares that day. You only cared about bragging to your friends that you were no longer just working for your wife. You never bothered to read carefully what you were signing. He snapped his head up, eyes bloodshot. You set me up. I stood up and looked him straight in the eye. I protected myself. The thing that set you up was your own greed. Margaret snatched the papers from her son's hands, but she couldn't understand all the legal jargon and numbers. She pointed a trembling finger at my face. You are so vicious. You plotted against my family from the very beginning. I stepped closer to her, my voice low, but articulating every syllable. If I had plotted from the beginning, this house would never have been in your name. If I were vicious from the beginning, your son wouldn't have sat in the CEO's chair all these years. If I had zero loyalty left, I would have brought the police tonight instead of just a lawyer. Julian suddenly lunged forward and grabbed my wrist. Eleanor, listen to me. The divorce papers were my mother pushing me. Chloe was just a moment of weakness. I never truly wanted to leave you. I was just under so much pressure about the baby issue. Pressured by my mom, crushed by the company's weight. Spare for me this once. I will fire Chloe immediately. I will come home to you and we can start over. I looked at the hand gripping my wrist. That hand used to wipe my tears after my miscarriage. That same hand let another woman adjust his belt in his office last night. My stomach churned with disgust. I yanked my hand away. Start over with what? With the fake divorce papers, the secretary in the office, or the words your mother just used to curse my infertility? Julian looked suffocated. He stepped back, his shoulders slumping. I am giving you one night. I picked up my bag. Tomorrow morning at 9, come to the office and hand over all executive authority. If you don't show up, I will send a suspension notice to every department, every partner, and every bank doing business with Preston Holdings. My mother-in-law screamed, You wouldn't dare do this to my son. I turned my head toward her. You should worry about yourself first. Tomorrow morning, the repossessions unforcession will be delivered right to your hands. I walked out the door. Behind me, Julian's hoarse voice called my name, but I didn't stop. Outside in the yard, the night wind blew through the decorative pines, freezing cold. I looked up at the pitch-black sky. My heart was no longer trembling like last night. The game had begun, and this time I was the one setting the rules. The next morning, I arrived at the company earlier than usual. The Chicago sky was just brightening, the early sun glinting off the glass panels of the Preston Holdings building, like the sharp edge of a knife. I stood in the lobby for a few seconds, looking up at the company logo I had personally chosen the colors, fonts, and lines for. For 10 years, this place was my dream, my blood and tears, my pride. Yet in just one night, I realized that dream had been eaten away from the inside by the man I shared a bed with. At 10 minutes to 9, I walked into the main boardroom. Lawyer Reed was already there alongside the head of legal, the HR director, and 2 trusted board members. Everyone was silent. On the table in front of me lay the resolution suspending CEO Julian Barrett, the protocol revoking his signatory rights, and a list of corporate accounts to be frozen that very day. I placed my hand on the stack of files. The cold feel of the paper beneath my palm made me strangely serene. At exactly 9, the boardroom doors opened. Julian walked in. He was wearing the dark blue suit I bought him during a trip to New York. His hair was neatly combed, his face finding composure, but the bloodshot eyes and dark circles betrayed him. Behind him was Chloe. She had no business being here, but clearly Julian wanted to use her as a shield or a final provocation. I looked at her. This is an executive board meeting. The private secretary's clearance was suspended this morning. Get out. Chloe stiffened, her red lips pressed tight. I am Mr. Barrett's secretary. I have a responsibility to take the minutes. I cut her off. From this moment on, you are no longer the secretary of anyone in this company. The entire room fell silent. Julian slammed his hand on the table. Eleanor, don't cross the line. Our private matters have nothing to do with business. I pushed the stack of resolutions toward him. Read this. Then we can talk about business. He picked them up and turned pale after just a few lines. Suspension. Revocation of executive authority. What right do you have to do this? I looked at him for a long time, then answered slowly. The right of the founding shareholder, the chairwoman of the board, and the person currently holding legal control of Preston Holdings. He let out a dry, trembling laugh. Did you forget? I also hold shares. I am not some regular employee you can just fire at will. Lawyer Reed placed another file on the table, his voice crisp. Mr. Barrett, according to the supplementary share agreement signed on May 18th of that year, the additional shares gifted to you by Miss Preston will be revoked if severe marital fault arises that causes harm to the company's interests. We currently have preliminary evidence of illicit workplace relations, misappropriation of corporate assets, and suspected illegal asset transfers. Julian snapped his head toward Reed. Shut up. You are my wife's lawyer. You have no right to judge me. I placed my phone on the table and played the audio recording from last night. My mother-in-law's sharp voice echoed in the boardroom. The Barrett family cannot end its bloodline. If you cannot give birth, you should know when to step down. Following that was Julian stammering and Margaret admitting she knew about the divorce papers. Julian's face went from white to gray. Chloe stood near the door, her eyes panicking, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. I turned off the recording. This is just the beginning. I haven't released everything, because I'm saving you your last shred of dignity. Julian looked at me, his voice dropping. Eleanor, do you really want to back me into a corner like this? I felt my throat tighten. Even now, this man still didn't understand. It wasn't me backing him into a corner. He had burned his own bridge back. Sign the handover, I said. He gritted his teeth. What if I don't? I glanced at the HR director. Send the suspension notice company-wide immediately. Notify the banks to freeze Julian Barrett's approval authority on all corporate accounts. Julian lunged forward and snatched the pen off the table, but not to sign. He violently threw it to the floor, his eyes completely bloodshot. Eleanor Preston, don't forget who has been entertaining clients for the past 10 years, who has been the face of this company. Without me, do you think this company would survive? I stood up, every word dropping as heavy as stone. Without me, 10 years ago, you were still unemployed. That sentence hit like a slap. He froze. Chloe kept her head bowed. I didn't feel triumphant, I only felt sad. Sad because up until this very second, what he regretted losing wasn't me, but the chair he was about to lose. Please hit the like button to support my story. Wishing all listeners great health and peace. Finally, Julian signed. His pen stroke shook so badly, the signature was distorted. When he put the pen down, I knew his power within Preston Holdings had officially collapsed. But right at that moment, Lawyer Reed's phone buzzed. He checked the screen, his expression growing serious, then leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Eleanor, internal audit just flagged 3 supply contracts with signs of embezzlement. The amount is substantial, potentially over $1.5 million. I clenched my fists. It turned out the infidelity was just dust on the surface. The real rot lay much deeper. I looked at Nathaniel. In that moment, all the noise in the boardroom seemed to fade away. $1.5 million. That number wasn't just money. It was the sweat of hundreds of employees. It was the sleepless nights I spent finalizing contracts. It was all the times I bit the bullet and paid high bank interest just to keep our cash flow alive. Yet Julian, the man I trusted with executive power, could so casually gut the company from the inside. Turn of war. He was still standing by the table, humiliation etched on his face after signing the handover. But when he heard the word audit, his eyes twitched slightly. Just that minor movement was enough for me to know he was aware of it. I asked slowly, "Do you have anything you want to say before I order them to open all the files?" Julian clenched his jaw, trying to feign calm. In a large company, contract discrepancies are normal. Don't just listen to some auditors and blame it all on me. I let out a cold laugh. A discrepancy of over 1.5 million is a very lucrative discrepancy. He gritted his teeth. "You're accusing me of embezzling company funds." I looked straight into his eyes. "I'm not accusing you. I am giving you one last chance to confess." Chloe, standing nearby, suddenly began to tremble. She thought she was only being dragged into an affair. She never expected the fire to spread to corporate fraud and criminal law. She stole a panicked glance at Julian. I absorbed it all. If a woman only loves a man, she will worry for him. But if she loves his money, when the money is threatened, her first instinct is fear. I turned to the CFO. "Sarah, put the files on the screen." The projector lit up. 3 supply contracts appeared, all signed with Apex Logistics, a vendor Julian had repeatedly praised as a long-term partner with great rates and efficient operations. Below each contract was a market price comparison. The markups were between 20 and 35%, inflating the total cost by over $1.5 million. Even more damning, the final payment accounts routed through 2 intermediary shell companies, one of which was registered under my mother-in-law's cousin. The entire room ran cold. I looked at Julian. "Explain." His lips parted. "I didn't handle these directly. Purchasing did. I just approved the proposals." The CFO lowered her head but spoke firmly. "Mr. Barrett, the system logs show you explicitly waived the pricing's appraisal step for all 3 contracts. The approval emails are still there." Julian whipped around. "Sarah, watch what you say. Who gave you the right to frame me?" I tapped my finger on the table. "I did." He choked. I picked up my phone and called the IT director immediately. "Lock out all access rights for Julian Barrett, Chloe Jenkins, and the 3 involved purchasing agents. Back up all emails, login histories, and contract edit logs. Do not let a single byte of data be deleted." The voice on the other end answered instantly, "Yes, Miss Preston." Right away, Chloe suddenly took a step forward, her voice shaking. "Miss Preston, this has nothing to do with me. I'm just a secretary. I just did whatever Mr. Barrett told me to do." Julian glared at her. "Shut your mouth." I smirked in such a rush to wipe your hands clean. "Miss Jenkins, I haven't even asked about the luxury condo at the Street Regis under your name. Where did the money for that come from?" Her face turned white as paper. Julian stood paralyzed. Their expressions told me Lawyer Reed was on the exact right track. The condo, the car, the designer bags, the lavish vacations, Chloe subtly flexed on social media. They were likely all fed by the blood of my company. I stood up, my voice dropping to a glacial tone. "This meeting is adjourned. From now on, all files related to Julian Barrett go to legal and the independent auditors. No one is to contact him or destroy or alter any documents. Anyone caught helping to cover this up will share the liability." Everyone filed out of the room until only Julian remained, looking at me. Gone was his arrogant demeanor. He stepped closer, his voice. "Eleanor, we've been married for 10 years. Do you really want to send me to prison?" I looked at the man in front of me, my heart aching with a dull throb. Not out of pity for him, but out of pity for the woman I used to be when you used company funds to keep a mistress. Did you remember we were married? He went silent. I picked up my files and walked out. As soon as I hit the hallway, Lawyer Reed's phone lit up again. He read the text, his face growing even heavier. Eleanor, the asset investigation team just sent more info. The 2 prime retail storefronts on Michigan Avenue owned by your mother-in-law. The funding shows clear signs of originating from these contracts. I clenched my fist. It turned out I wasn't just betrayed by one person. The entire Barrett family had been sitting at the banquet table, feasting on the fruits of my labor. I sat in my office until nearly noon, staring at cash flow statements so long they made my eyes blur. The cold numbers linked together like knife cuts against my self-worth. 3 dirty contracts, 2 shell companies, 1 personal account belonging to Margaret's cousin, and finally the money flowed into 2 retail spaces on the Magnificent Mile and Michigan Avenue. One was leased to a luxury cosmetics brand, the other to a high-end jeweler. The estimated value was nearly $2 million. That $2 million wasn't just on paper anymore, it had mutated into real estate, monthly rental income, and the luxury trips and designer handbags Margaret loved to show off to her society friends. I asked Lawyer Reed if we had enough grounds to freeze them. He placed another stack of documents in front of me. If we only rely on the flow of funds, we need further verification. But Margaret's cousin signed a personal loan agreement with Julian at the exact time the money moved. The loan had 0 interest and no repayment deadline, and was subsequently used as a down payment for the storefronts. This is a textbook sign of asset laundering. I laughed bitterly. So, the entire Barrett family practically set up their own syndicate. Lawyer Reed stayed silent for a few seconds before saying, "Eleanor, if we take this to the very end, this is no longer a marital dispute. It becomes an economic crime. Do you still want to give Julian a chance to make restitution on his own?" I looked out the glass window at the gray clouds pressing down on the city. For 10 years, I had given him too many chances. So many that he mistook my forgiveness for a bottomless well. No, but I want him to watch every single layer of his fake skin being peeled off. That afternoon, I had my driver take me to the storefront on Michigan Avenue. The glass was sparkling, the gold-plated signage luxurious, and customers bustled in and out. I stood across the street looking at it for a long time before calling Margaret. She picked up quickly, her voice still choking with rage. "What more do you want? You've already stripped my son of his title." "Are you trying to squeeze us to death?" I replied calmly. "I am standing in front of the jewelry store on Michigan Avenue. Would you like to come out and take one last look at your property?" The other end fell dead silent, leaving only the sound of heavy, jagged breathing. A moment later, she growled, "What nonsense are you talking about? Don't you remember? This store is under the name of your cousin Robert. But the purchase money came through 3 of Preston Holdings' supply contracts. Do you think if the feds ask, Robert will take the fall for you?" Margaret screamed. "You dare investigate me?" I looked at my reflection in the glass. "I'm not investigating you, I'm just finding my money." She hung up. 15 minutes later, Julian called. I watched his name flash on the screen and let it ring to the very end before answering. "Eleanor, what are you doing to my mother?" His voice was raspy. He had probably just finished arguing with her. "I haven't done anything. I just let her know those 2 prime storefronts aren't as clean as she thought. However much you want, I will pay you back. Don't drag my mother into this." I laughed out loud. "Pay me back with what? The CEO chair is gone. The gifted chairs are about to be revoked. Or are you planning to sell the condo you bought for Chloe?" He went silent. That silence was a confession in itself. I asked further, "Does she know where the money for that condo came from?" "Eleanor, leave Chloe alone. She doesn't know anything." Even now, he was still defending her. My heart, which I thought had gone completely numb, still suffered a fleeting stab of agony. "And what did I know when you used company funds to support her? What did I know when your mother used that money to buy stores? What did I know when you stood in front of me playing the devoted husband all these years?" Julian gasped for air. "I was wrong. I will fix it. If you want me to kneel, I will. If you want me to dump Chloe, I will. But if you blow up the financial issues, the company will suffer too. Don't destroy Preston Holdings just because you're mad at me. I gripped the phone tight. You have no right to speak of Preston Holdings. You were the one who destroyed it first. I hung up. Immediately after, Lawyer Reed sent a new text. Chloe Jenkins just withdrew cash from her personal account and booked a flight to New York tonight. I stared at the text, my lips curling into a cold smile. The first rat had smelled the smoke and was trying to flee the nest. I texted Nathaniel back, have your people secure all evidence connected to her. Tonight, I want to see Chloe before she has a chance to vanish. I didn't go to the airport right away. I knew a person like Chloe wouldn't just run with a few clothes. She would go back to her condo first to gather documents, cash, jewelry, and whatever dirty money gifts Julian had bought her. I had the driver head straight to the street. Regis. The luxury condo tower shone brightly in the night, so opulent it felt sterile. That was where I had once wanted to buy a small unit for my own mother to retire in. But after she passed, I lacked the courage to walk into beautiful places devoid of warmth. I never expected Julian would use my company's money to buy a place here for another woman. He stopped at the lobby. Lawyer Reed was already waiting with a legal assistant. He handed me a thin file. Unit 32B is under Chloe Jenkins. The payments linked to Julian's personal account and a wire from Apex Logistics. I took the file, my fingers gripping it so hard the edges bent. Is she still up there? Yes. My guy saw her bring a suitcase down, but she went back up because she forgot her passport. I smirked. Perfect timing. We got into the elevator. The floor numbers ticked by slowly. Every chime struck against my frayed nerves. The doors opened on the 32nd floor. The hallway had plush carpeting and warm yet fake ambient lighting. It was so quiet I could clearly hear the wheels of a suitcase rolling behind the door at the end of the hall. I rang the bell. Silence fell inside for a few seconds. Then Chloe's voice rang out full of suspicion. Who is it? I answered. Eleanor Preston. No reply, but immediately after I heard something drop and the sound of frantic footsteps. I rang the bell again. Open the door. If you want me to call security and file a report right here in the hallway, I have no problem with that. The door cracked open. Chloe stood behind it, her hair hastily tied up, wearing no makeup, her eyes swollen red. She no longer had the sweet, soft demeanor of a protected secretary. Before me stood a panicked woman, desperately clutching a designer bag like a life preserver. Miss Preston, what are you doing here? I pushed the door open and walked in. She tried to block me, but seeing Lawyer Reed behind me, she backed away. The condo was spacious with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River, white leather sofas, a marble coffee table, and expensive perfumes displayed on the shelf. Everything wryer of money, my money. I looked at the two open suitcases in the middle of the living room, packed with clothes, jewelry, documents, stacks of cash, and a passport. Leaving in a hurry? Chloe bit her lip. I'm going back to my hometown for a few days. I don't know anything about the company's issues. Please don't pressure me. I picked up a velvet box from the table. Inside was the diamond bracelet I had seen on her social media. Julian bought this for you. She lowered her head. I didn't ask where the money came from, didn't ask, or didn't dare to ask. She burst into tears. Miss Preston, I was tricked too. Julian said you two had been separated for a long time. He said the divorce papers were finalized, and he was just waiting to announce it. He said you didn't love him, that you only used him as a tool for the company. I felt sorry for him, that's why. I looked at her coldly. Felt sorry for him enough to accept a multi-million-dollar condo, a car, designer bags, and luxury vacations. Chloe choked. Her tears fell fast, but they didn't move me. I had already cried enough for all three of us. Right then, her phone rang. Julian's name flashed on the screen. I looked at her. Answer it. Put it on speaker. She shakily pressed answer. Julian's voice came through immediately. Chloe, are you at the airport yet? Don't listen to anything Eleanor says. Just go to New York first. I'll handle things and meet you there. Make sure you bring the condo deed. Don't let her get a hold of it. Chloe's face went white. I calmly pulled out my own phone and hit record. The voice continued. If anyone asks, Just say you don't know where the money came from. Everything was a voluntary gift from me. As for the contracts, absolutely do not mention them. Did you delete the emails I told you to? I glanced at Lawyer Reed. He gave a subtle nod. That's enough. Chloe broke down, sobbing. Julian, Miss Preston is right here. The other end went dead silent. A few seconds later, the call disconnected. Please hit the like button to support my story. Wishing all listeners great health and peace. I put the velvet box back on the table and looked at Chloe. You have two choices. 1. Keep protecting him and sync with him. 2. Hand over all emails, text messages, bank statements, and everything you know to my lawyer. I won't promise to let you off the hook, but I can note your cooperation. She collapsed onto the floor, burying her face in her hands and sobbing hysterically. A long time later, she shakily pulled a laptop from her suitcase and placed it before me. I kept backups. I was afraid he might dump me one day, so I kept everything. I watched the screen light up. Folder after folder appeared. Apex Logistics 2021. True pricing wire to mom. Chloe Kondo. Julian texts. Every file name was like another nail driven into the coffin of my marriage. Chloe sat curled up on the floor, hugging her knees, her voice ragged. Miss Preston, I truly didn't know at first that it was company money. Julian said it was his private bonus, his investment returns. I didn't look at her. You didn't know when you got the condo, but you knew later. She kept her head down. That silence was her answer. I opened a chat log between her and Julian. In it, Chloe had asked explicitly, "Is it safe to wire this much money? If Eleanor finds out, we're dead." Julian had replied, "She only cares about the massive contracts. She never checks the small supply lines. Don't worry." Reading that, my palms went freezing cold. To him, my trust was just a loophole for him to exploit. Lawyer Reed adjusted his glasses, his tone strictly professional. Eleanor, these emails prove Julian ordered the contract inflation and instructed Chloe to destroy evidence. There are also forwarded emails to Margaret regarding the purchase of the 2 storefronts. I turned to Chloe. What else? She shuddered. That's it. That's all I managed to save. I stared dead into her eyes. You kept this because you were afraid he'd dump you. A careful person like you wouldn't just keep a few easily accessible folders. If you want to cooperate, do not test me. Fresh tears spilled from her eyes. She crawled over to her suitcase, dug into the bottom lining of a makeup bag, and pulled out a small black flash drive. Her hands shook so violently she almost dropped it. This is an audio recording. Julian was drunk one time talking to his mother in the living room. I was scared, so I recorded it. I took the USB drive. Lawyer Reed immediately plugged it into his secondary laptop. Seconds later, Julian's voice filled the luxurious condo he had bought for his mistress. His voice was slurred from alcohol, but every word was razor sharp. Mom, don't worry, Eleanor has no clue. I can juggle those contracts. Give me 2 more years to drain enough capital, and I'll leave the company an empty shell. By the time we divorce, she won't be able to do anything with a dead carcass. Margaret's voice chimed in cold and greedy. What about her shares? She holds too much. I'm not at ease. I'm finding a way. If I can pressure her into signing a proxy, I can siphon them over time. If not, just keep using her infertility to break her down. Women like her act tough on the outside, but deep down, they're terrified of losing their husbands. I sat completely motionless. I thought I had felt the absolute bottom of pain. But it turned out there was an even deeper abyss. For 10 years, I hadn't just lived with a cheating husband. I had lived with a parasite calculating the exact day he would bleed my company dry and toss me aside with an empty shell. He used to hold me on nights I cried from exhaustion, whispering, "Rest, I'm here," all while sharpening his knife behind my back. Chloe wailed out loud. "I'm so sorry, Miss Preston. I know I was wrong, but he lied to me too. He said he would marry me. He said you were a wife and name only. He said his mother had already accepted me." I stood up and walked right up to her. "You weren't blinded by love. You were blinded by greed. You saw his money, his power, the houses, the cars, and you thought you had won. Now that you've lost, you call yourself a victim." She sobbed silently, not daring to argue. I didn't want to hear her crying anymore. I turned to Lawyer Reed. "Secure all the data, send it to the independent auditors tomorrow morning. and draft the formal criminal complaint. Draft a cooperation agreement for Chloe, but all assets tied to the dirty funds must be frozen. Chloe's head snapped up. Miss Preston, this condo. I looked around the massive room, the expensive furniture, the fake warm lighting. You live in a condo bought with my company's money and you're asking me what happens to it. She fell completely silent. Right then, my phone buzzed. Unknown number, I answered. A deep male voice came through. Is this Miss Eleanor Preston? It's Marcus, Julian's old driver. I have some things I want to give you. If you want to know what he's been doing behind your back for the last 3 years, meet me in the company's underground parking garage tonight. I gripped the phone. Another door was opening, and I knew the darkness behind it would be even thicker. I left Chloe's condo near 10 at night. The city outside was still brightly lit, but my heart felt leaden and gray. Lawyer Reed suggested he accompany me to the garage, but I shook my head. Some truths, no matter how filthy, I needed to see and hear for myself. I texted my location to my corporate security detail to stand by close, then drove myself back to the Preston Holdings building. The underground garage was eerily empty late at night. Fluorescent lights flickered on the ceiling, and the exhaust fans hummed like drawn-out sighs in the dark. As soon as I stepped out of the elevator, I saw a man standing by concrete pillar B17. He wore an old jacket, a baseball cap pulled low, his hands clutching a brown manila envelope. Marcus, he looked up. I recognized you immediately. Marcus had been Julian's private chauffeur for nearly 4 years before abruptly quitting, claiming he had to move back to his home state to care for a sick father. Back then, I even gave him a severance bonus because I thought he was an honest, discreet worker. Yes, Miss Preston. His voice was raspy and trembling. Why are you looking for me now? Marcus glanced around and lowered his voice, because before I was afraid Mr. Barrett had powerful backing. I'm just a driver. If I spoke up, I wouldn't just lose my job. My family wouldn't have known peace. But these past few days, hearing he got suspended, I figured if I stayed quiet, I'd be doing you wrong. I looked at the envelope in his hands. What's in there? He handed it to me. Inside was an SD card, several photocopied receipts, a vehicle log, photographs, and a small handwritten notebook. I opened the notebook. Dates, locations, hotels, restaurants, and condo complexes filled the pages. There were days Julian told me he was entertaining clients in the suburbs, but the log showed Marcus driving him and Chloe to a resort in Lake Geneva. There were nights he claimed he was in late meetings, but Marcus logged dropping him at Chloe's condo at 2 in the morning. I gripped the notebook. This proved his infidelity, but I needed more. Marcus nodded quickly, pulling out several photos, and this 3 years ago, Mr. Barrett frequently visited a legal services office in the West Side. I overheard him on the phone. It sounded like forged documents. One time he got back in the car holding an envelope, telling Chloe that the divorce papers were done, just waiting for the right moment. My blood ran cold. Did you see what was inside? Yes. One time he was drunk and dropped some papers in the car. I saw a photocopy of a divorce decree with your name and his, but the notary's seal looked really weird. I got scared, so I took a picture. He handed me his phone. The photo was a bit blurry, but clear enough to make out my name, Julian's name, and a fake red court seal. I let out a laugh, but my throat tasted bitter. So, the so-called divorce wasn't just sweet talk to trick his mistress. He had genuinely prepared a forged legal document to legally erase me from his life. Marcus swallowed hard and continued, Miss Preston, there's one more thing. I don't know if it's important. About half a year ago, Mr. Barrett met several times with a guy named Derek, the director of Apex Logistics. They talked in the car, thinking I couldn't hear. Mr. Barrett told him that if the company got audited, they should push all the blame onto the purchasing and accounting departments. He also mentioned he had hidden an alternate set of ledgers in a safe at his mother's house. My head snapped up. A safe at Margaret's house. Yes, the Wanatka mansion, second-floor study, hidden in a wall cavity behind a large family portrait. I saw him open it once. Chills ran down my spine. I bought that house. I paid for the expensive renovations. Yet hidden behind a family portrait was the dirty evidence he planned to use to frame innocent people.
How do you know this so clearly?
Marcus lowered his head, wringing his hands. Because that day, Mr. Barrett made me transport a small metal lockbox there. He told me if anyone asked, just say it was Margaret's antique silver. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Are you willing to testify? Marcus fell silent for a long time. I didn't push him. In the empty garage, water dripping from a ceiling pipe onto the concrete echoed loudly. Finally, he nodded. Yes, but you have to promise to protect my family. Mr. Barrett once said, if I ever crossed him, I wouldn't survive in Chicago. I looked him dead in the eye. You give me the truth. I protect you with the law. He exhaled deeply as if a boulder had been lifted off his chest. I dialed Lawyer Reed, asking him to come to the building immediately. But before I could say more, my phone lit up. A text from an unknown number, just a photo. It showed the front door of my mother-in-law's house wide open. A man in a black cap was walking out carrying a small metal box. Below the picture was a message. Too late? The evidence is on the move. I stared at the photo, my hands turning to ice. Julian had made his move first. If this text was real, he or his mother had hired someone to move the evidence overnight. If I was even a few minutes late, the final pieces of paper could vanish forever. I immediately turned to Marcus. Do you recognize the man in this photo? Marcus zoomed in on the screen, his face draining of color. Yes, I think that's Derek, the director of Apex. I drove Mr. Barrett to meet him a few times. I called Lawyer Reed. Nathaniel, go straight to the Wetka mansion. Bring your witness and request local police backup. Someone is removing evidence from the house. Lawyer Reed's voice grew tense. Eleanor, don't go alone. I'm on my way. I hung up, signaled my security to follow, and sped out of the underground garage. It was late in Chicago, but the streets were still busy. Red lights, sirens, and neon reflections blurred past my eyes like an endless nightmare. I drove so fast my hands, gripping the steering wheel, went numb. I only had one thought. I couldn't let him erase his tracks. I couldn't let my 10 years end with insufficient evidence. When I arrived at the mansion, the main gates were ajar. Julian's car was parked haphazardly in the driveway, a door still left open. As soon as I stepped out, I heard Margaret's voice echoing from inside. What are you standing around for? Take it away now. Don't let Eleanor find it. I shoved the front door open. Margaret was standing in the middle of the foyer, her hair disheveled, still wearing that wrinkled silk outfit from last night. Julian stood by the staircase, pale as a ghost. The man named Derek was just coming down from the second floor, clutching the small metal box. All three of them froze when they saw me. I walked in step by step, my voice so cold it felt foreign even to me. Late at night and the house is so lively. Margaret immediately stepped in front of Derek. What are you doing here? This is my house. I looked at her. By tomorrow it might not be. Julian rushed down the stairs, grabbing my arm to pull me outside. Eleanor, listen to me. It's not what you think. Derek is just here to pick up some old business records. I yanked my arm away. Old business records that you had to hide in a wall safe? Just how stupid do you think I am? His face hardened. Derek backed toward the rear exit, but my security guard blocked his path. He gripped the metal box tightly, sweat pouring down his temples. I held out my hand. Give me the box. Derek looked at Julian. Julian gritted his teeth. Don't give it to her. I pulled out my phone and hit record. Fine. Then every word in action tonight will be sent straight to the police. Derek, you are holding documents related to a suspected embezzlement of over $1.5 million from Preston Holdings. If you walk out with it, you are not just an accomplice. You are destroying evidence. Derek trembled. Margaret screamed. Who are you trying to scare? You think just because you have money, you can frame anyone? I stared at her without blinking. You spent my money for 10 years without getting sick of it, and now you say I'm framing you. She choked. Right then, the sound of cars pulling up to the gate rang out. Lawyer Reed walked in with 2 local police officers and a neighborhood security patrolman. Julian saw them and turned Ash in. Eleanor, are you really pushing this so far? I turned to him. You were the one who taught me that when dealing with people who have no conscience, you must use the law. Derek finally let go. The metal box was placed on the table. Lawyer Reed drafted an on-site inventory under the watchful eyes of the police. When the box was opened, inside were stacks of contracts, ledgers of payouts, a flash drive, and several corporate seals for shell companies. But when I checked the very bottom compartment, my heart sank. It was empty. There was only a rectangular outline in the dust where something important used to sit. Marcus, standing behind me, blanched. That's not right. Last time I saw a red file folder in there. I whipped my head toward Julian. He had his head down, but the corner of his mouth twitched up, a tiny fleeting smile, but enough for me to understand. He had pulled a bait-and-switch before I arrived. I stepped right up to him, my voice low. "Where is the red folder?" He looked at me, a glimmer of sheer madness finally breaking through his eyes. "Want to know? Get on your knees and beg me." I looked at the man who used to be my husband, suddenly feeling remarkably calm. A man backed into a corner using humiliation to grasp at his last shred of power. I didn't answer. I just turned to Lawyer Reed. "Check the cameras, the gate cameras, the street cameras. I want to know where that red folder went." Julian's let out a raspy laugh. "Too late, Eleanor. You won a few hands, but you haven't won the whole game." I looked at him. "Then let's keep playing, but remember this. Someone who has lost all trust has nothing left to fear." I left the Wetka mansion near 2 in the morning. In the back seat of my car, the metal box was sealed in evidence bags, but in my mind, I only saw the empty bottom compartment and Julian's twisted smile. That red folder definitely contained the most critical leverage. Otherwise, he wouldn't have dared use it as his final card to challenge me. Lawyer Reed sat beside me, constantly calling contacts to review the neighborhood's security footage. I looked out the window at the trees fading into the darkness, my heart terrifyingly calm. In the past, if Julian gave me the cold shoulder, I would stay awake all night wondering what I did wrong. Now, with him hiding evidence and provoking me, I felt no pain at all. When a woman's heart dies, what's left is not tears but absolute lucidity. Lawyer Reed's phone buzzed, he answered, and his expression shifted immediately. "Eleanor." The gate camera caught something at 9:42 p.m. Margaret handed a large red envelope to a middle-aged woman driving a ride-share vehicle. "The license plate is partially obscured, but a neighbor's camera might have a better angle." I turned to him. "Who is the woman?" "Still verifying, but there's a strange detail. Julian only called Derek to pick up the metal box after the woman left. It seems the box was just a decoy." I closed my eyes. Julian still had some brains left. He knew I would track the safe, so he intentionally let me seize a portion of the evidence while the most vital piece was sent away first. But who was the middle-aged woman, a relative, a former employee, or another link in the syndicate? Before I could ask, my phone lit up. This time it was a text from Margaret, just one sentence: "If you want to protect your mother's honor, stop." I stared at those words, my hands freezing. My mother had passed away 7 years ago. She was a gentle woman who spent her life running a small fabric shop, scraping together every penny to put me through school, never fighting with anyone. Why was Margaret bringing up my mother now? I called her back immediately. She answered after a few rings, her voice raspy but full of malice. Finally scared. "Are you?" I gripped the phone. "What are you holding?" Margaret sneered. "The truth. You think your mother was so clean? The house you sold to start your company, the paperwork had issues. If that gets out, not only is your mother's reputation ruined, but the initial capital for Preston Holdings will be investigated." My blood ran cold. That house was the asset my mother left me before she died. She personally signed the deed over to me and I sold it to get capital. Everything went through a notary. I had never suspected a thing. "You're making this up. Whether I'm making it up or not, ask your lawyer. The red folder is in my person's hands. If you keep pushing my family, tomorrow the entire business world will know Chairwoman Eleanor Preston built her empire on a fraudulent, disputed property." I clearly heard Julian's panicked voice in the background. "Mom, stop talking." Margaret yelled back, "Shut up. If she wants to push us to death, I'll drag her down with us." The call disconnected. I sat motionless for a few seconds. A very different kind of pain surged in my chest. Not because of Julian, but because of my mother. I could endure people dragging my name through the mud, but I would not let them drag my mother's memory into it. Lawyer Reed looked at me. Serious, Eleanor, don't rush to believe it. These could be forged documents, but if they dare use it to blackmail you, they've prepared thoroughly. I will recheck the property records from that year. I shook my head. Don't just check. Find the old notary, find the county clerk's archives, find anyone whose name was ever attached to that property's history. I want to know what they dug up and what they forged. As we pulled up to the Preston Holdings headquarters, Nathaniel's assistant sent over a video clip from the neighbor's camera. The woman receiving the red envelope had pulled down her mask for a few seconds to put on her helmet. I zoomed in on the screen, and that face made me freeze. It was Martha, my mother's former housekeeper, who had quit the year I got married. The day my mother died, she was the first to arrive and clean out the old house. My palms turned ice cold. If Martha was involved, the Barrett family's conspiracy might have started much earlier, long before I discovered Julian's infidelity. I looked at Lawyer Reed. Find Martha tonight before she vanishes. Lawyer Reed had his team track down Martha's old address immediately. She used to live in a small house in an industrial suburb, but when we arrived, the door was padlocked. Neighbors said she had left less than an hour ago, carrying a large duffel bag, taking a rideshare to the Greyhound bus station. I stood in the damp alley, staring at the fresh padlock on the rusted door, my heart growing colder by the second. A former housekeeper disappearing right as a vital red folder was moved. If anyone called this a coincidence, even a child wouldn't believe it. Lawyer Reed turned to me. Eleanor, she might be trying to flee out of state. I'll have people check the bus manifests heading to the Midwest or Appalachia tonight. I shook my head. No, she isn't stupid enough to go straight home if she's carrying highly sensitive documents. She'll seek out a place she thinks is completely safe first. I quickly sifted through memories of Martha. When my mother was alive, Martha worked as a part-time maid, cooking and cleaning, occasionally staying overnight when my mother's arthritis flared up. She was quiet, frail, and always kept her head down. My mother took pity on her and even lent her money for her son's medical bills. After the funeral, Martha abruptly quit, saying she was going back to her home state to watch her grandkids. At the time, I was drowning in grief and didn't ask questions. Looking back, her resignation was too perfectly timed, as if she had just completed a specific task. Suddenly, a place came to mind. St. Jude's Parish. Lawyer Reed looked at me. Which one? When my mother was alive, she volunteered at St. Jude's Parish on the south side every month. Martha tagged along many times. If she's terrified, she might hide there. Less than 40 minutes later, we pulled up to the church. It was nearly dawn, a thin mist covering the old stone roof. The faint sound of morning bells echoed in the air. I walked into the courtyard, my heart heavy as stone. An elderly nun, Sister Mary, recognized me after hearing my mother's name and silently led us to a row of modest guest rooms in the back. The door to a small room was cracked open and muffled sobbing came from inside. I pushed the door open. Martha was sitting on a wooden cot, clutching her duffel bag to her chest. Seeing me, she jumped up in sheer panic, all the color draining from her face. Miss Preston, please don't force me. I don't know anything. I looked at the bag in her arms. If you don't know anything, why are you running? She hugged the bag tighter, her eyes bloodshot. I was forced. Margaret told me if I didn't help, she would send people to collect the debt I owed your mother from years ago, and she would report my son for illegal gambling. I'm an old woman. I just want peace. I stepped closer, my voice trembling as I fought for control. Where is the red folder? Martha burst into tears and collapsed to her knees on the tile floor. I'm sorry, Miss Preston. I wronged your mother, but the files in there aren't entirely real. They made me sign an affidavit saying, your mother conned a relative out of the house and then used it to fund your business. But it's not true. Your mother never conned anyone. That house was rightfully left to her by your grandmother. My throat tightened. Then why did you sign it? Shaking violently, she opened her bag and pulled out the red folder. Inside was the affidavit, some photocopied old land deeds, an audio recording on a USB, and a promissory note bearing her signature because they had a recording of me lying. They said if I didn't obey, they would release it. I was so scared I took Margaret's money. But last night, carrying this away, I kept thinking of your mother. She saved my son's life once. I couldn't let them smear her name. I took the folder, my hands trembling. The documents inside were masterfully forged, a mix of half-truths and lies. They wouldn't hold up in court upon rigorous inspection, but they were more than enough to destroy my mother's reputation online, enough to cast doubt on me, enough for Julian to drag me down into the mud with him. I looked at Martha. Are you willing to testify to this? She bowed her head, weeping bitterly. I will. Just please protect my children and grandchildren. I turned to Lawyer Reed, draft a statement immediately, record audio and video, seal the entire folder. First thing this morning, we file supplementary criminal charges. But right at that moment, my phone rang. It was Julian. I put it on speaker. His voice came through raspy and chilling. Eleanor, you found Martha, didn't you? You think you've won? I'm at the company. If you aren't here in 30 minutes, I will blow Preston Holdings to the ground. Literally, I froze. From the other end of the line came the piercing, deafening shriek of a fire alarm. I rushed out of St. Jude's Parish before the sun had fully risen. The church bells rang softly behind me, but in my head, there was only the piercing shriek of the fire alarm echoing from Julian's phone. Lawyer Reed immediately called building security and alerted the authorities. I sat in the car, my heart pounding as if it would burst from my chest. As much as I hated Julian to the bone, I understood one thing. Preston Holdings wasn't just my company. It held hundreds of employees, client records, project data, and the hard work of innocent people. If he was truly crazy enough to drag everything down with him, I would never forgive myself for arriving late. As we turned onto the street approaching the building, I could already see the flashing lights of fire trucks and police cruisers. Security guards were evacuating the night shift personnel. Some people clutched laptops. Maintenance workers in uniform stood shivering on the sidewalk. I threw the car door open. The biting morning wind hit my face. The head of security ran up to me, pale. Miss Preston, the fire alarm was triggered on the 26th floor, but we haven't seen heavy smoke. Mr. Barrett is locked inside the CEO's office. He won't let anyone in. He says he will only see you. I clenched my fists. Is anyone trapped? No, fully evacuated, but he won't open the door. Lawyer Reed grabbed my arm. Eleanor, don't go up alone. Let the police handle this. I looked up at the high floor that used to be Julian's office. That room had witnessed the day we toasted our first contract, and it was where I caught him with Chloe. I knew he didn't call me to negotiate. He wanted me to witness his final pathetic downfall. He wanted to drag me into the madness he had created. I will go up, but not alone. 2 police officers accompanied me into the VIP elevator. Lawyer Reed followed, his phone already recording. The higher we went, the louder the alarm shrieked. When the elevator doors opened, the 26th floor hallway was flashing with red strobe lights. A faint smell of burning plastic hung in the air, unclear if it was from electrical equipment or something he had burned. The CEO's door was deadbolted. Inside, Julian's hoarse laughter echoed out. Is Eleanor here? I stood before the door. I'm here. Open it. An officer motioned for me to step back, then shouted, Julian Barrett, open the door and cooperate. Any action endangering others will be met with maximum legal force. Silence fell inside for a few seconds, followed by the sound of something shattering. Legal force. You're only here because she has money. Everyone takes her side. I closed my eyes, then opened them. Julian, if you want to see me, open the door. If you have any shred of manhood left, don't hide behind a lock. That sentence seemed to strike his final nerve of pride. The deadbolt clicked open. The officers instantly took tactical positions. I stood behind them, looking inside. The office was in chaos. Files littered the floor. The corner of the curtains was scorched, and a fire extinguisher rolled by the desk. Julian stood by the desk, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, clutching a USB drive and several crumpled papers. On the desk, the framed photo commemorating the company's 10th anniversary was smashed. A crack in the glass ran straight across my smiling face. He looked at me and burst into laughter. You won, Eleanor. You got the company back, the houses, the money. What else do you want? I want you to pay for what you did. He shook his head, laughing louder. No, you want me to kneel. You want me to admit I lost to you. But do you know why I betrayed you? Because next to you, I never felt like a man. You're too capable, too cold, too untouchable. I stood beside you for 10 years and felt like nothing but a shadow. My chest tightened, but not out of love. It was because in the end he still twisted his own inferiority into my fault. I never asked you to be a shadow. You chose to stand in the dark. His face twisted. He held up the USB. I have backups of the ledgers here. If I lose everything, don't expect a day of peace. I looked at him, speaking with absolute calm. Martha confessed. The red folder is with my lawyer. Chloe handed over every email. Marcus is ready to testify, and Derek was detained at the mansion. Julian, you have no cards left to play. His eyes shattered, the manic energy drained from his face, leaving only a pathetic hollow shell. He stumbled back a step, his shoulders slumping. Impossible. Chloe betrayed me. You betrayed everyone first. He looked at me, his lips trembling. Eleanor, if I go to prison, how will my mother survive? My heart turned to ice. When she tried to smear my dead mother's name, did she care how I would survive? That silenced him. The police moved in and restrained him. Julian didn't resist. When the USB dropped to the floor, the tiny clatter was swallowed by the blaring fire alarms. But to me, it was the final sound of a kingdom of lies crumbling. As they walked him past me, he suddenly stopped, his voice a ragged whisper. Did you ever truly love me? I looked at the man who had ruined my last 10 years, and answered very softly, I did because I truly loved you. The pain is so deep that I can never forgive you. He lowered his head and was escorted into the elevator. The fire alarms finally cut off. The entire 26th floor sank into a heavy silence. I walked into the wrecked office and picked up the broken picture frame. In the photo, the Eleanor of 10 years ago was smiling brightly next to the husband she believed was her forever. I placed it face down on the desk and walked out. Dawn broke through the glass windows. Faint but unmistakable. A long night was over, but the true trial for the Barrett family was just beginning. 3 months after the day Julian was escorted out of the 26th floor, the criminal case officially went to trial. The inflated contracts, the money laundered through Apex Logistics, the 2 storefronts under Margaret's family, Chloe's luxury condo, and the red folder used to defame my mother, all were entered into evidence. I had thought that seeing him stand in the defendant's box would make my heart feel lighter, but no. On the first day of trial, sitting in the victim's gallery, looking at Julian in a faded dress shirt, his hair buzzed short, his face gaunt, I only felt a cold, empty void in my chest. That man used to be my whole world. Now he was just a terribly expensive lesson. He turned back to look at me, his eyes stripped of the madness from that day in the office, leaving only exhaustion and despair. Eleanor. I looked at him serenely. Don't call me that anymore. He bowed his head. Margaret sat in the row behind him, crying until she lost her voice. She no longer wore pearl necklaces or expensive silk. She no longer carried the arrogance of a mother-in-law, pointing fingers at my infertility. The 2 storefronts were seized. The Wanetka mansion was repossessed under the asset proxy agreement. Her savings accounts were frozen pending the money laundering investigation. For the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to lose what she thought was hers forever. Chloe took the stand as a witness. She wore a simple white shirt, no makeup, her eyes swollen. She admitted to accepting the money and the condo, and keeping the emails and audio recordings because she feared Julian would abandon her. When the prosecutor asked if she knew the funds were illicit, she stayed silent for a long time before bursting into tears. I knew, but I was greedy. I thought as long as I was loved, that was enough, and eventually everything would be mine. I listened without anger. People usually don't fall because of one moment of weakness. They fall because they keep their eyes shut even when walking off a cliff. The trial lasted several days. Julian was convicted of embezzlement, forgery, destruction of evidence, and fraud. Derek from Apex Logistics was also arrested. Margaret was investigated as an accessory for receiving and concealing illicit assets. And I, after everything, signed the divorce decree on a lightly rainy afternoon. The paper was so thin, yet it took me 10 years. An unborn child and countless nights of self-blame to finally sign it without my hand shaking. Lawyer Reed sat across from me, his voice gentle. "Eleanor, it's over." I looked out the window, the rain blurring into long streaks on the glass. Yes, it's over. But truthfully, I know my life doesn't end with a divorce decree. Following a painful restructuring, Preston Holdings gradually stabilized. I overhauled the finance department, appointed new leadership, ordered public audits, and restored transparency to the company. Employees who had been anxious began returning to work with renewed trust in their eyes. One morning, as I walked into the lobby, the receptionist bowed her head. "Good morning, Miss Preston." Not Julian's wife, not Mrs. Barrett, just Eleanor Preston, and for the first time in many years, hearing my own name felt strangely fulfilling. On the anniversary of my mother's passing, I brought a bouquet of white lies to the cemetery. I knelt before her grave, placing my hand on the cold headstone. "Mom, I'm sorry. I let them use your love as a weapon against me. But I took it back. Your honor, your house, my whole life. I took it all back." The wind blew through the pine trees as gentle as a hand stroking my hair. I didn't cry, or perhaps my tears had dried up long ago. All that remained was a very profound peace. On the way back, I stopped by the Preston Holdings building. The late afternoon sun struck the corporate logo, making it shine like a healed scar. I stood in the lobby, taking a slow, deep breath. 10 years ago, I built this place out of love. 10 years later, I kept it for myself. That evening, I received a text from Lawyer Reed. "The initial verdict is in. Julian Barrett received the maximum sentence. Do you want to file a civil suit for further damages?" I stared at the text for a long time before replying. "Just follow the law. I don't need further revenge. I just need justice." Setting my phone down, I opened the balcony doors. Chicago at night was still loud, still bright, still indifferent to the pain of any one person. But that very indifference reminded me that life always moves forward. Those who betray will pay the price. And those who are hurt must learn to live on, not to prove their strength to anyone else, but to never let themselves down again. This is the story of a woman betrayed by her husband, financially exploited by her in-laws, and whose marriage was invaded by a mistress. Yet she remained clear-headed, using the law, evidence, and her own self-respect to reclaim justice. The story carries intense themes: marriage and family, strong female leads, betrayal, infidelity, asset disputes, retribution, and healing. Through Eleanor Preston's journey, listeners can clearly see that while marriage requires trust, a woman must also know how to protect her honor, assets, and self-worth.